Hey everyone, so great to see you. Oh, almost didn't make it in here. It's been 2 days flying all around different countries. Thank you for staying. This is actually a topic that I very much enjoy. You're going to see this after I introduce myself, so thank you for staying. On the agenda today, I'm going to briefly introduce myself, then we're going to take a look at Brazil beyond samba and caipirinha. Then we are going to talk about like hacking real world public goods and how did that actually happen last year with the Brazilian government. After that, we're going to take a look at the 3 main challenges that we faced during this opportunity, and then maybe decide together on next steps that could be taken not only in Brazil and Latin America, but other countries across the globe. So for me, I think the important thing of this, for what we're going to discuss next, it's actually my background. So I'm a lawyer who wanted to build things. So my path until like getting into build solutions was very like lonely, because I had to come up with different suggestions and ideas and talk to people and get to know developers. But going through this process made me realize how relevant it is to be creative and to build open source. And because of that, I think I can communicate that well for different types of partners, for like the government and for institutions, educational institutions and more institutional partners. Because I've lived that myself. I'm a living proof of how the Web3 mindset and open source ways of building things brings value to different chains. So a very quick look on the Brazil, and this is an intended typo. There are some people in Brazil now that are not using the Z as some people would to refer to our country, but we're claiming back our original name, how it goes. And one of the things that I would like to highlight is that the crypto market, the blockchain industry in Brazil is super institutional. What do I mean by that? That big institutions and the government itself and the banks and retail shops and so many other industries are experimenting with the blockchain technology. This is the first living exercise of a CBDC in Latin America is taking place in Brazil, where different countries, including big banks, have already started their own nodes to explore with the blockchain technology. And why am I saying this here? Because I think it's super important that we position ourselves and bring some of our mindset, right, to all of these places that are experimenting with the Web3 technology. Moreover, I wanted to talk to you first on the why hacking real-world public goods is relevant. From my perspective, having more transparency and also accountability on the management of public goods is something of the essence, not only for Web3, but to solve some of the real-world problems that we face. So given this, I was just thinking, everybody in my country was thinking about central bank, right, and CBDCs and stable coins and so on and so forth. And my idea was more of the kind, okay, but what are the Brazilian public goods? Let me study a little bit about that. So I came to the realization that the public goods of Brazil are not only buildings, but the forests. We spoke so much here about the carbon credits and different, refi solutions. Okay, the Brazilians are the owners of one of the largest natural assets or relevant assets for the refi, market, however we want to call it. But not only that, also the beaches and the islands of Brazil and the rivers and the grottos. Everything that is owned by the federal government to that end, and in Brazil it is a lot of state. It's around $300 million, it's 2 trillion reais. It's going to depend on like the conversion rate, but it's a lot. So shouldn't we be managing or experimenting with the opportunity to manage such public goods on chain? And that was the question that was relevant for me as a Brazilian to answer. So giving all of this, I went to the Ministry of Economics and said, hey, I have an idea. Can we experiment with tokenizing these assets, registering them on chain, monitoring, and giving different use cases? And to my surprise, or not, giving all this context I gave to you, they engaged in this very educational and for the first time in the history of my country, maybe Latin America, to propose and to do something like this. So what was our first challenge, like working together? A design challenge, right? What is the methodology that we are going to use? How are we going to teach people about what federal-owned real-world assets are? How are we going to teach the population about like developing on blockchain? How are we going to make sure that everybody has access to this challenge? Where are we going to put the challenges on? Are we going to use something private or public? How do we make sure that we are keeping, you know, this educational and noteworthy and relevant, for the people engaging? So it was very complex to, you know, come across what would be the best solution for all of that, and I'll tell you in just a few minutes how I did it. But the other very important challenge that we had to face was, okay, how are we going to scope these challenges, and what questions are we going to be asking the developers in the community? How are we going to pose the right questions so that people can hack on top of them? And coming to the realization of what these questions were was probably the hardest part of the whole hackathon. So how did we think about solving this problem? And again, this is something that is relevant for myself. It's something that's called computational law. I don't know if you've heard of it, but a simple Google is going to take you to different sources of good information. Also, the MIT Computational Law Report, I suggest you take a look. But the idea was looking at the legislation, seeing what would be like compliant, what would be desirable, but also looking at the forefront of the position that Brazil could, you know, occupy globally, and think about how to bring value to the individuals, to the users, and to the public, and to the commons. So it was all about understanding what could be done and hacking some challenges that would bring benefits to the population, not only on the transparency side, but whatever other benefits that we could think of. So we mainly decided to pose 3 challenges. The first one was like registering public assets in a blockchain. The second one was like, okay, once we have these assets there, what can we do with them? And thirdly, and not less relevant, is contract management and compliance. So a lot of like whoever was dealing with carbon credits was having to deal with everything that was discussed earlier here. And one very important note is that this was fully open source and open knowledge. So who were the partners of this challenge, and why is this relevant? Brazil has something amazing, which is like a government builders agency. Yes, it's thousands of developers. This is a public company. When I mean public, it's not like publicly owned, like stock exchange. I mean like owned by the government. So these developers are actually the ones that do most of our technology infrastructure. And they do hackathons already in Brazil. And they were part of this hackathon because they have already experimented with other opportunities, but this was the first open source hackathon that they engaged on. So this was super cool. Besides that, there was all of these partners that you can take a look at. And of course, I didn't mention in the beginning, but it was written in there. I'm the Latin American lead for Salo Foundation. So it was very interesting because besides these partners that you can see here, and now I'm going to the how we went part of things, is that we made a way to engage with the highest number of Brazilian individuals as possible. So over 500 people enrolled to join this hackathon, and I find this number astonishing because it's in an intersection of everything that is super complex. Web3, government, law, public goods, refi, you name it. It's a very complex subject to come around, and we were super happy with the realization that so many people were interested. So we separated the hackathon in 2 phases, and each one lasted around 1 week. So everything was online and transmitted on official channels. The first part of this was like workshops. So the public officials were teaching people how they do their work. Okay, this is our database. This is how we manage this type of things. These are the challenges that we have. So whenever you see in conferences people complaining, hey, We need to build things that have like usability. Let's focus on the use cases. Why not ask the client? Or even better, ask how we can make the public goods that we need to survive better for ourselves. So this is actually what we were doing there, and like they were posing the challenge, but also letting us know what are like the hardships of all that. After that, of course, there was a marathon to teach people how to code in Solidity. I think 27 submissions were done on chain. 19 projects were awarded. All of this took place in December last year, so it's super recent. We also had 2 ceremonies, one opening and one closing ceremony, and all of this is recorded for future hacks. So all the projects were submitted like on chain. You have access to their pitch decks. They're talking about carbon credits. They're talking about how you make different types of investment proposals with public goods. They're talking about so many interesting things that usually we talk in conferences, but we try to, you know, get access to these goods in different ways, shapes, or forms when we, as individuals of a certain country, may already have, in a way, these goods to take care of. So one of the things that I wanted to propose, and now I'm here leaving some time for a question, is, okay, what can we do next? Now that we understand that the Web3 way of thinking things, the blockchain industry, the open source coding has space in more institutional things, that we can think about hacking public goods, but also under the lenses and the scope of what we use in terms of public services and also like public owned goods owned by the government itself. And thirdly, how can we start? So prior to coming here, I was just at ETH Barcelona in a very interesting panel that ended with me like making an invitation. And I said, okay, we travel the whole world, but why aren't we using these conferences and the hackathons that we have in these conferences to maybe liaise with the locals and ask them, okay, what would you like to see built? And have one specific track directed to building something for that specific city. Why don't we do that? We travel the whole world together. Why can't we have like a track that delivers public good and public infrastructure at the request of the locals, not us inside our own like buildings and inside of our own ways of thinking, hacking, like trying to project outwards, but actually connecting with the locals and providing some sort of infrastructure. So this is my first pledge and something that I would love to do together. And the second thing that I'm also like calling a pledge would be a 1% pledge. And how would that work? So maybe we could talk with different governments and tell them, hey, would you allow Web3 community to hack with 1% of this country's public goods? This is a tryout. This is an experiment. You're going to let us know what are the public goods that we can be hacking. Can we be hacking about like refi solutions? Should we be hacking about, I don't know, identity or abandoned public buildings? They are today like a source of expenses, but not a source of, you know, profit, something that is harming whatever and you cannot take care yourself. So could we do that and make that a pledge and have a more steady type of like hackathon and building together to make sure that this happens? So kind of like, thank you very much for listening to me. The idea here is kind of like being a thought-provocative initiative in which we think about ways to getting outside of the walls of these conferences and hacking with the locals and sometimes and whatnot, also hacking with the government. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'm super happy to answer.
We have like a minute or two for questions. So if anybody wants to ask, be free to do so. Okay.
Hi, yeah, you talk about like digitalizing some assets or like tokenizing some assets like forests, grottos or whatever. What would happen like from a legal perspective or anything if these tokens would be stolen by some hacker or attacker or anything like that?
This is certainly something that we need to think, and that's why I was saying that the design part of the challenge is so relevant. We all know this is a nascent industry and that we still have a lot of challenges, you know, to overcome. But how can we have a methodology in which we start experimenting without exposing, you know, to harm this different type of things? Maybe we're going to come into the conclusion that the use case for registering this information is make sure that there's less disputes when it comes to public land, and not actually having like the titles of those lands being traded or bought using on-chain technology. So when I talk about methodology and like getting crisp on these use cases, it's exactly because of that, because we still have a lot of challenges to tackle, but that doesn't mean that if we look for like some of these challenges and opportunities in a very like spot on way, we cannot do it. And another very relevant like aspect that I think is that if we bring these discussions inside conferences, then the conversations, they get way more technical than whenever like a more institutional player is like experimenting with adopting like this type of technology. So building this bridge between this world and that world, and how we can cooperate and coordinate beyond, it's exactly the question that I'm trying to, you know, propose so we can start getting hacky with it. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Camila. We're unfortunately out of time for any more questions. So thank you.